It was actually one of my best and favorite filmmaking experiences. I remember after the first day of shooting the film, crying, but in a happy way, and just kind of feeling like I'm fulfilling my life's purpose.
Who is Alessandra Lichtenfeld, and why did she write a film entitled Broken Hearts? What can a heart warrior teach the world about living with a CHD through film? How does a heart warrior go from being fixed to needing open heart surgery at 23 years of age? Welcome to Heart to Heart with Anna. I am Anna Jaworski and the host of your program. I'm also a heart mom to a single ventricle patient who is post-Fontan and doing very well. My heart warrior is also my inspiration and the reason I am the host of your program. Today's show is heart warrior, writer, producer of Broken Hearts, and our guest is Alessandra Lichtenfeld. Alessandra Lichtenfeld was born with pulmonary stenosis and has had 6 procedures on her heart, starting from when she was 2 years of age. Through her life, she has had periods of illness at age 9 and as a young adult. She is a filmmaker and music video director whose work has been showcased in Billboard, Pitchfork, Stereogum, Under the Radar, and more. She received her BA from UC Berkeley with a double major in psychology and linguistics. She has an MFA in film and media production from UT Austin. She enjoys making surreal, absurdist comedies and dramas about difficult subjects such as bullying and chronic illness. To date, she has directed 4 films, including Broken Hearts, Pixie Sticks, Just Here for the Good Vibes, and Just in My Head. Welcome to Heart with Anna, Alessandra.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to be talking to you today, Alessandra. This is going to be so much fun. But let's start with talking about you as a heart warrior. We know from your bio at the top of the show that you had 6 heart procedures and that you've studied film, linguistics, and psychology in college. If you had to sum up who you are in just 2 to 3 minutes, who would you say Alessandra Lichtenfeld is?
I'm a curious individual, so studying psychology and linguistics. I had always been interested in film, but there wasn't a film production program in my undergrad. So I just went to study things that were interesting to me, which I do feel do relate to film, especially in terms of writing and character development. And that was kind of part of what I thought when I decided to major in psychology and linguistics is I was like, well, no matter what I end up doing in life, I'm probably going to be working with humans at some point, and they all have a psyche and they all use language. So I feel like it will benefit me to study these things. And I definitely feel it has. It certainly taught me a lot about seeing the world and people and just everything through different lenses, different perspectives, especially stuff with language. When you learn about other languages, you learn about how different cultures view the world and view things really, really differently. So that's just one aspect of myself. And then another thing is I'm an animal lover. I have 2 cats, but I also love dogs. I've just never had the privilege of owning one. I'd like to save that for when I have a yard.
That helps. It definitely helps. I have 2 big dogs, and it would be really hard if we didn't have a nice yard for them.
Yeah, exactly. So they just have more energy and need more structure. Cats are more independent, can figure out how to entertain themselves. Although people don't realize that they do get emotionally needy in the same way dogs do. One of my good friends does call me a cat whisperer, so I'm proud to say that I can be good at herding cats, getting them to do what I want them to do. So
that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool because herding cats is notoriously something that's difficult to do. So if you can do that naturally, that tells me a lot about who you are, Alessandra.
Thanks. And I will say, I think my background in psychology helps as well, because learning about how humans are motivated, cats are easier than humans. Humans are harder, of course.
Sure. Because so many of them have complex past.
Yeah.
Which is something that you actually talk about in your film that we'll get into more later.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another thing that I think is important to bring up, something that's big for me is, yes, as someone with heart disease, there was a summer camp for children with heart disease that I went to growing up, and I continue to go back there now as a camp counselor. So I really enjoy that and being able to be a mentor for younger kids. Personally, I always like to choose the adolescent age, which apparently isn't as popular. But I like it because for me, it was such a difficult time emotionally. I suffered from a lot of depression and anxiety at that age, but I got through it. And I think especially I had a lot of insecurities about my heart condition and about having scars. So I just love to be able to be a beacon of support for other 13-year-olds or 14-year-olds starting to deal with all those more complex emotions about heart disease and about feeling like they're different or isolated or ugly because of their scars.
Yeah. Well, I just love your films, and I love how you've been able to incorporate some of those themes in your films. And we'll be talking about that more later. But I'm curious how you went from studying linguistics and psychology to film. And you've already touched on that a little bit. But did you always know you wanted to work in film?
I would say I was always a pretty creative kid. And actually in second grade, I have like this story. So a lot of it is because of my uncle, my mom's brother. He's a screenwriter and independently does plays. And he went to film school many, many years ago, like in the 70s or 80s. So I think a lot of it was probably his influence, him showing me films that weren't necessarily in the mainstream that kind of got me really being into love of film, particularly Terry Gilliam. If any of you know him in the film world, everyone knows him, but he did Monty Python. Actually, that's what he's most famous for.
Oh my gosh, my husband loves Monty Python. So something that's a little irreverent, a little not necessarily mainstream, like what most people are doing.
Yeah, kind of this like absurdist, surrealist humor, which is something, if you've seen my film, you might see some of that influence there. So yeah, when I was in second grade, I was inspired to write this little play, this little script about leprechauns, which that was like the beginning. And yeah, I mean, and so my path had kind of gotten skewed away. Like, I think I was kind of scared of doing an unconventional career path. And that was part of why I didn't study that in college. But in the end, once I graduated and was really forced with, okay, what are you going to do now in the world? I was like, well, it's always been film and I want to do film. So I went back into pursuing that more after I finished my bachelor's.
And you've already met with so much success, Alessandra. It's exciting. Your film
Thank you.
was selected for the Slam Dance Film Festival. Can you tell me more about that? Because I had never heard of that before.
Yeah, so Slam Dance, it's definitely considered one of the best film festivals. It's kind of its own. And I kind of like to describe it as sort of like the Berkeley of film festivals, because there's an aspect of it that's anarchist and rebellious and pushing back against the mainstream aspect of the film festivals, especially in terms of that these big top tier A-list film festivals are so often you need to have a lot of money and already have a lot of funding and have big productions or big names behind you to get into those. And so the creators of Slam Dance, it started back in the mid or early 90s. It was these filmmakers who were frustrated with not being able to get into the Sundance Film Festival, which that one's,
right.
And so they decided to start their own little festival at the same time, same place as Sundance. And it was supposed to be more for independent, more like earlier on in their career filmmakers who didn't have the money and the backings of these bigger companies. And since then, they really have made a name for themselves. They've been successful. There have been many filmmakers that went on to be nominated or win Oscars that got their start like 20 years prior at Slam Dance. Ari Aster, he does more like horror, but he did Midsummer and Hereditary. And the director of Parasite, Bong Joon-ho. And there's just, the Russo brothers, which, I'm not that into Marvel, so I don't know that world as much, but they're apparently extremely famous. They've done like multiple Marvel films, but they got their start at Slam Dance. And there's so many names like that who had their first little 3-minute film or their first feature was at Slam Dance. And that kind of started their career and they went on to. So it is a really big deal. And I'm just so proud to have been able to have the film in Slamdance. And the other aspect of it is, since they try to be pioneers, they started having this new category called Unstoppable, which is specifically for films about disability or with a actor with disability, or the filmmaker has some sort of disability. And the purpose of that is to, since it's such a marginalized community to begin with, especially in films, they want to showcase that more and give these types of people more of a voice, especially in the film world. And no one else really is doing that yet. So my film was in that category, and I am now programming for next year in that category, which I'm really happy and grateful and proud to do.
Home Tonight Forever by the Baby Blue Sound Collective.
I think what I love so much about this CD is that some of the songs were inspired by the patients.
Many listeners will understand many of the different songs and what they've been inspired by. Our new album will be available on iTunes, Amazon.com, Spotify.
I love the fact that the proceeds from this CD are actually going to help those with congenital heart defects.
Enjoy the music.
Home Tonight Forever.
This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed in the podcast are not those of Hearts Unite the Globe, but of the hosts and guests, and are intended to spark discussion about issues pertaining to congenital heart disease or bereavement.
You are listening to Heart with Anna. If you have a question or comment that you would like addressed on our show, please send an email to Anna Jaworski at anna@hearttoheartwithanna.com. That's anna@hearttoheartwithanna.com. Now, back to Heart with Anna.
Before the break, we talked with Alessandra about how she became involved in filmmaking. In this segment, I want to talk to her about why she made the film called Broken Hearts. Having lived through 6 heart procedures, you have a lot of experience to draw from for your film, Alessandra. What inspired you to write and produce Broken Hearts?
Well, it was my thesis film for my MFA graduate program at film school. And so I wanted it to be something that was important to me, and it's a bigger deal since it's your thesis film. And the school gives us a significant portion of money to make the film. So there were high stakes. I was like, it has to be a really great film. And going into my thesis year, I was seeing my cardiologist, and I found out that I'd had a valve replacement 3 years prior. So it was an open heart surgery that I'd gotten, that surgical valve. And the valve was ideally supposed to last 10 to 15 years. But for unknown reasons, it had started to develop blood clots and then was just causing issues, with blood flow. And I was going to have to get another valve replacement. And this one ended up being a procedure. They can actually do valve replacements through catheters now, which is really crazy. But still, just the idea, even though I had had 5 heart interventions prior to this, there was just something about this one that just kind of got to me more in a certain way. Like I never really felt so mortal, is kind of the way I described it, because if you really start to think about it, this isn't a choice, right? It's like I either do these procedures or eventually I'll just die soon.
Or have a stroke. If you were having clots,
that's
the scary
true.
thing is the stroke.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, So I had pretty much decided that I wanted to do a story about this, or based on these experiences, and something about this new idea of mortality that I was experiencing. And this girl who I had grown up with at heart camp, she had a much more severe heart condition than mine, including pulmonary hypertension, which if people know of that, it's really difficult to live with. And people with that, I think, tend to have a shorter lifespan. It's my anecdotal experience. Anyway, so she was deemed ineligible for a heart transplant around that time, and she died that October, that fall semester. She wasn't a super close friend, but I considered these girls that I grew up with at this heart camp, they were the first people I'd ever met with heart disease like me. And I just always feel like I have such a special bond with these people. So it really affected me.
It's almost like a heart sister, isn't it?
I really do consider these people my family. And yeah, and that's how it felt. Another thing that was so hard for me to grasp about it was that her birthday was coming up. And just the idea of knowing this is 100% going to be your last birthday. And she died 2 days after her birthday. Birthdays are a big deal to me. And I remember getting people to send her sprinkles cupcakes because I was like, it should be like a lavish, luxurious birthday. She should have these designer cupcakes.
I love it. Designer cupcakes.
And then I remember, like, because there were other issues, and it's like, I wanted to have people send her flowers, but it's like in hospitals, there's all these rules about that kind of stuff. Like, we couldn't send her flowers. And then because of her condition, it was also really important about the sodium levels in the cupcakes. I remember calling the company and being like, I can't find the exact gram of sodium. What is it? But yeah, I kind of just like took it on. And anyways, I just channeled all of that basically into this movie. And I wanted it to be something relatable and something, oh, that was another thing. So this girl, her name was Becca, the one that passed away. I had found she had this blog that she had worked on for years, which was kind of like a diary, but written in a
Are you
really...
talking about Becca Atherton?
Yes. That's exactly...
She wrote from my most recent book.
Oh my gosh.
I just loved her. Yeah. I think she touched everybody she met. In fact, I feel myself tearing up just talking about her. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was very, very special. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Well,
so now I know exactly who you're talking about. She was such an inspirational young lady.
Yeah. And yeah, well, that's amazing. I'm glad you know her and can connect on this. So yeah, anyways, during this time when she was really sick and was kind of literally on her deathbed, I found this blog that she had. You know of it? Yeah. And so I just started reading it voraciously, just trying to read everything about it. And I remember coming across this one thing where she was talking about how upset she was that she couldn't go on roller coasters anymore, and talking about how that may seem like such a inconsequential thing, such a silly thing to be upset about, roller coasters, but what it represents. And I can't even describe it the way she did, but there was something about that. And I think that was what inspired me to do the film, focusing on getting your ears pierced, where it seems like such a small thing, but it's also something like living the life of a normal person. You just get your ear pierced and it's no big deal, right? It's not something you have to think about, or you can just go do things like that. But as someone with heart disease and with overprotective parents, you're not allowed to do something like that. And as a girl, that's such a big deal in this culture, is having your ears pierced. So that was all the things that inspired this film.
Well, one thing that I've been talking to a lot of people about this season, for some reason, we've done a lot of shows on mental health. And we know that just reliving that trauma of having that heart procedure, whether it's open heart surgery or whether it's even a catheterization, that can affect you psychologically. So can you take us behind the scenes and talk about what it was like to relive it by, first of all, writing the script, but then secondly, producing it and directing people to act it? That must have been really a fairly unusual experience.
I would say, I think other artists or filmmakers will say this about their work. For me, it's very therapeutic to do this. I'm processing it in a way that heals me. It helps me. And that's why I do stuff on difficult subjects, but kind of transform it in a way where it's more palatable to the audience. And also for me, I guess, it was actually one of my best and favorite filmmaking experiences. I remember after the first day of shooting the film, crying, but in a happy way, and just kind of feeling like I'm fulfilling my life's purpose. I felt like it was going so well. I fortunately had really great producers, better than I'd ever had previously. I had more help on this film than I've ever had previously. So I got to focus more on the artistic aspects. And I was so happy about that and just felt like it was going so well. And just seeing the story come to life and the casting had gone well. I felt good about my actors previously going into it, and it was all really great. It just felt so special as it was happening. It was all positive. Oh, and the other thing about talking about reliving it, it's interesting because just in the past year, I've started to realize a lot of things that I never really thought about before in terms of how my heart condition has affected me. As a child, it's really interesting. You don't perceive things the way an adult would. I never felt fear the way that people would necessarily think. I mean, it was just always normal to me. I remember asking my dad, like, oh, will I maybe die when I have this open heart surgery? But I wasn't afraid of it.
Did you really? Because that's actually rather precocious, depending on what age you were, that you recognized your own mortality.
I was 9, but I think it was also me picking up on the anxieties of my parents and everyone around me. I don't remember ever feeling that way. I don't remember being afraid of dying or being afraid of there being an afterlife or not. I wasn't having these existential crises or anything. I was just like, oh, it might happen, it might not. It was very lax or blasé.
So I'm curious because you just laid a lot on me and I'm wondering, okay, so how did your dad react? Because my child had a procedure at 17 and we had this talk. It was, I won't say traumatic, but I had homeschooled my kids. And so we had done religious studies and philosophical studies, and it became a very philosophical, spiritual conversation. So how did that conversation go with your dad?
Yeah, well, my dad is a doctor, so I think that has helped in many ways. I could go on a whole tangent about that. But that, along with, I think, just his demeanor, he's a very composed person. And my parents are also both very spiritual, more than religious per se, but they definitely believe in an afterlife and reincarnation. And they meditate and are involved in a lot of new age stuff, which, again, if you've seen the film, you can see that's definitely where the influence came from.
Okay, I was wondering about that. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. In that exact moment, I remember being in the car with him, and the way I had asked was kind of just the way kids just say things sometimes, like,
yes,
like that can be really
out of the blue.
Yeah. And so I was just saying it like it's nothing. And I don't remember my dad reacting in a particular way. I think he was matter of fact about it. In retrospect, I understand my parents were really scared. And I will say to this day, I think these kinds of things are, at least for me, I feel like it's always been harder on the people around me who love me, because I'm just, I don't know, when I'm in surgery or whatever, I'm unconscious. I'm not experiencing any of it. And then also, as morbid as it is to say, it's like if I die, I'm not going to be experiencing the loss of myself. They are. So I think in that way, it's harder on loved ones. Not to say that there aren't a lot of difficulties that us as the patients go through, but in that regard, yeah. So as a kid, I don't remember going into a whole spiritual philosophical talk ever about it.
Well, you were pretty young if you were talking about that at age 9. So to keep it a very matter-of-fact conversation makes a lot of sense. And it was a catheterization, so it wasn't quite as risky, or was it an open heart procedure?
So I had 3 things happening when I was 9. First, I had a catheterization and it didn't work. Then I had open heart surgery. And so this conversation was going into the open heart surgery. It was pre-open heart surgery. And then after that open heart surgery, I was having a lot of complications, and I had to have another, it was closed heart surgery, but it was still surgery, but not like the whole bypass and opening your ribs and everything. Right. But I had to have another surgery to correct some complications that I was having from the open heart surgery. So I had 3 surgeries in the whole spring of 2001.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And now it's 2022 and you look great. So apparently whatever they did, it has worked well for you.
Yeah. At this point, I think I'm at my healthiest. I think I have the best functioning heart I've ever had in my life, because at that time, they just ended up taking out my pulmonary valve. And at that time, they were like, oh, you can live a long time. You can maybe even live a lifetime without a pulmonary valve, which later some new data came to show that you can't live a whole life. You can live like 15 years or so without a pulmonary valve. And Then I got a surgical valve, which that was the one that got blood clots. And then I got a catheter valve to replace that. And so now I actually have a pulmonary valve, the best functioning pulmonary valve I've ever had in my life. So yeah, I'm at my healthiest.
Anna Jaworski has written several books to empower the congenital heart defect, or CHD, community. These books can be found at Amazon.com or at her website, www.babyheartspress.com. Her bestseller is The Heart of a Mother, an anthology of stories written by women for women in the CHD community. Anna's other books, My Brother Needs an Operation, The Heart of a Father, and Hypoplastic Left Heart Syndrome, a handbook for parents, will help you understand that you are not alone. Visit babyheartspress.com to find out more.
Heart to Heart with Anna is a presentation of Hearts Unite the Globe and is part of the Hug Podcast Network. Hearts Unite the Globe is a non-profit organization devoted to providing resources to the congenital heart defect community to uplift, empower, and enrich the lives of our community members. If you would like access to free resources pertaining to the CHD community, please visit our website at www.congenitalheartdefects.com for information about CHD, the hospitals that treat children with CHD, summer camps for CHD survivors, and much, much more.
Before the break, we were talking with Alessandra about her short film, Broken Hearts. And in her bio, we also learned that you've directed 3 other short films. Can you tell us a little bit about what those films are about?
Yeah, those are all films that I did in my MFA program. Technically, there's other films that I had before, but it's hard to decide where does the cutoff go professionally. But yeah, so the first one, Just in My Head, that was a short documentary, and I focused on generalized anxiety and depression. I had followed 2 girls who were struggling with that and the stigmas around that. I've struggled a lot with really intense anxiety, starting coincidentally after all my surgeries, which
Maybe not so coincidental.
right. Yeah. But going into middle school, when I was 10, I started having a lot of anxiety, and it just got worse and worse over the years. So that's something I've always been really passionate about, is anxiety, crippling anxiety and depression, and the stigmas about that. And also, it's really cool because I've experienced both. So I have the unique experience of being able to see the way I'm treated differently with my physical illness versus my mental illness. And I will say, absolutely, there's more stigma. It's so much easier for me to talk about congenital heart disease than it is for me to talk about some of the mental health issues I've had.
Really? And yet you chose to make a film about it. Do you think that was one of your ways of coping with what you've had happen?
Absolutely, yeah. And I was very passionate about it at the time because I had just started taking anxiety medication for the first time in my life, and it had drastically helped me. It changed my life for the better. And I had always internalized so much stigma about like it's bad in some way to take stuff that's going to maybe change you or change your personality. My parents coming from this new age place, and I don't blame them. Like, they had always had concerns or just wanting things to be as natural as possible. But I don't think they ever really realized how intensively I was struggling with anxiety. But that was some of the reason why I decided to do that for that film that semester. Then the next film I did was Pixie Sticks. All of my films come from a personal place.
I think that's what makes the best films. That's what makes the best books, because you understand it from the inside out.
Yeah. And as I say, well, one, it makes writing easier because I don't have to do as much research because I've already lived it. And yeah, it does very much go with the thing of write what you know. And I do write what I know.
What was Pixie Sticks about?
That one was focused on elementary school bullying. I was bullied a lot in elementary school at different periods. And it was a story about these 2 friends, and they're made fun of by the cool girls. And that one's more surreal, and it's like an 8-minute film. And I called it that because there's a thing where they eat pixie sticks together.
I loved Pixie Sticks when I was a kid.
Yeah. And then the next one, Just Here for the Good Vibes, that was around the time of the 2016 election. And I just started noticing a lot of hypocrisy amongst people that I knew who claimed that they had these very social justice ideals and philosophies, but yet in action, I noticed them doing very opposite things. And it was really frustrating me, the things that they would preach on social media, but then who they were as a person, their behaviors and stuff, it was frustrating me a lot. So then I made this satire basically on hypocritical social justice warriors, because I felt like at the time it wasn't something being critiqued, although now I feel there has been more parody and stuff about that.
Were you living in Austin when you did that?
I was living in Austin, but I will say, having lived in Berkeley and in California the majority of my life, I don't consider Austin to be a very liberal place.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious?
Yeah.
I went to school at UT Austin as well. But I came there after I had been in San Antonio at a very conservative Catholic school. So, yeah, to me, Austin seemed extremely liberal. but compared to Berkeley, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, I think because it still just has the whole Texas vibe. But regardless, I will say for the South, I'm sure it is extremely liberal in certain ways and doing great things. But it wasn't from Texas or Austin. It wasn't those people that I was feeling frustrated with. It was other people from Southern California. But anyways, it was a story about this guy that was doing a concert to raise money for shoes for these Amazonian tribes. And he was really just pocketing the money. It was just a funny little parody about that kind of thing.
Okay, and some of these films are only 8-minute films, but what I've discovered is when you try and do something super short like that, it's even harder than if you do something that's much longer. Was that your experience as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say it's just a totally different type of story structure from what I've learned. You can't go at it the same way that you would with a feature-length story. It's just a different type of character development, different type of story structure. There's that saying about writing a speech. It takes a lot less time to write something that'll be a long speech than to get it concise. And I would say the same thing. You're trying to pack as much bang for your buck, get as much as you can get across in a concise and effective way in as little time. So,
yeah. So every single word counts when you're doing an 8-minute film. There's no room for excess. Okay, so it sounds like you've been really successful with Broken Hearts and with some of these other films. What's up next for you?
So I would like to make my first feature. One of my peers from my film program, she just shot her first feature back in February, and she's already submitting to festivals now. And so that inspired me or motivated me to really push along. I have a script in the works, but it's still pretty in early stages. It's hard to say because so much changes during the writing process, but at least the track that I'm going on right now is sort of, I describe it as a Gone Girl meets Mean Girls, and kind of like a slasher comedy rape revenge film.
Wow. You just packed a lot of themes and topics and tropes in one sentence there. Wow. Okay. This sounds like it would be a must-see film.
Thank you. I hope so. Yeah, I'm working on it, so we'll see where it goes, but I would like to have already shot the film and be editing it within a year from now is my goal.
Wow. That's an ambitious goal. Are you living in California again with your parents? Or are you still in Austin?
I moved to North Hollywood, specifically LA area, right as I was graduating from UT Austin, which coincidentally was right before the pandemic, which was a weird time to graduate from film school and start a film career. So I'm living on my own here in North Hollywood, and I've just been doing a lot of gig work and babysitting and video editing jobs and stuff like that, just kind of figuring it out and trying to balance work with my creative projects, which aren't yet necessarily making money, but the hope is that they will.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. There are many heart warriors that I know of who are very creative like you, and they would love to be involved in film or acting or on stage in local theater. What advice would you have for people who do have a chronic illness, such as a congenital heart defect, who want to be involved in the arts?
In general, I would say I personally dealt with a lot of my own internalized stigma of the idea of the arts not necessarily being a viable career path. But in the end, I was very unhappy at the idea of not pursuing that and the idea of living a life where I didn't do that, but was living a stable life. I realized it was so depressing. So I would say if there's any pushback or you're unsure about it or feel insecure, really try to remember that this is something that you're passionate about, something you were maybe born to do, or there's a reason why you love it. And you absolutely should pursue it and keep working on it. Another thing is insecurity. I get writer's block a lot out of this perfectionist idea of being like, oh, it has to be really good script, has to be really good story. And then that will prevent me from doing anything because I'm so afraid of it not being good. And I guess letting other creatives know that that's something that we all experience and they're just thoughts. They're not real. And you have to start somewhere and no one's first draft is amazing and to keep pursuing. In terms of having chronic illness, I mean, I'm not really sure. It's interesting because a lot of times I don't think of myself as someone with a chronic illness or disability, but I think again, just because that's the normal that I have. So it's only in certain times where it's highlighted that I notice. But I guess working to advocate for yourself if there's things that you need. And I know that's harder to be done than said.
Well, yeah, sometimes when you're working on a film or if you're in theater, especially, I know I had a kid who was a theater kid and practices could go on and on and on for hours. And what happens if you're exhausted? I mean, do you speak up or are you afraid of being replaced? Because there's always another pretty face out there wanting your position on the film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a reality. And the only thing I can say, at least on my own end, I didn't even plan to ever come across the CHD advocate type path. I just made this film because it meant something to me. And then I got into slam dance and then I started doing interviews and then ended up being this voice for CHD. But it's felt really fulfilling in that way because it does help raise awareness. So at least on my end, helping raise awareness and connecting with other people who have CHD or who have other types of disabilities or needs, and especially in the creative field. And that's why I feel really great about being a part of Slam Dance Unstoppable, because we're trying to help with that and help make it possible for people with disabilities to be involved and to be actors and to get their potentially other needs met. So I think it is still a difficult world to navigate in that way because there is prejudice against that and discrimination. And I know people with CHD that have such a hard time telling employers or letting other peers, other employees that they work with know. And I think it is still a difficult world in that way. But I would say maybe the best way is to just make sure that you meet other people who are going through the same thing as you. And then together you can feel more strengthened in learning how to advocate for yourself and advocate for each other.
Sure. There's power in numbers. And that's a good reason to be involved with groups like the Adult Congenital Heart Association or keeping in touch with those friends that you made when you went to heart camp. By having other people around you that are part of your tribe, then that empowers you. I can't believe our time is up already, but my producer is telling me my time is up already. And I could talk to you for hours. This has been so interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the program today, Alessandra.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a great experience.
Oh, I'm so glad you feel that way. Well, friends, that does conclude this episode of Heart to Heart with Anna. Thanks for listening today. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please consider becoming a patron. Just go to www.patreon.com/heart2heart and pledge a monthly amount to support our program. It only takes a few minutes to make a big difference. For the cost of a pizza, you could help us to continue providing great programming for the CHD community for an entire year. So have a great day, and remember, my friends, you are not alone.
Thank you again for joining us this week. We hope you have become inspired and empowered to become an advocate for the congenital heart community. Heart to Heart with Anna with your host, Anna Jaworski, can be heard at any time wherever you get your podcasts. A new episode is released every Tuesday from noon Eastern Time.